Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we are checking out the RTX 3080 Ti from Nvidia. We've got more than just the Founders Edition too, as we're also checking out Gigabyte's gaming OC model, the Palit GameRock OC, and Inno3D's iChill X4. If you missed the keynote at Virtual Computex 2021, the RTX 3080 Ti is Nvidia's latest GPU. Built on the same GA102 silicon as the 3080 and the 3090, it's only got 2 fewer SMs than the 3090, meaning 256 fewer CUDA cores and 8 fewer texture units. The main difference though really comes down to the memory, with the 3080 Ti offering 12 GB of GDDR6 clocked at 19 gigabits per second, and that's compared to 24 gigs on the RTX 3090, but clocked slightly faster at 19.5 gigabits per second. On paper though, that's still not a big difference between the two GPUs, so we're going to dive in now and find out exactly what sort of difference you can expect when gaming. To do so, we're using our regular GPU test system provided to us by PC Specialist. This is built around the Intel i9-10900K overclocked to 5.1 GHz on all cores. That's paired with the ASUS ROG Maximus 12 Hero motherboard, and we also have 32 GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 memory clocked at 3600 MHz. All the data you're about to see on screen in just a moment has been tested fresh with the latest drivers. So for AMD we use the 21.5.2 driver, and for Nvidia we use the 466.47 driver. For the 3080 Ti however, Nvidia provided us with the 466.54 driver. Just a final note on the data we're going to show in this video. For our game benchmarks we are primarily focused on the Founders Edition. Later on though, we will show differences in performance between all 4 of the 3080 Ti cards we have, as well as taking a deep dive into the thermals, acoustics and more. But for now, let's roll the game benchmarks. Our first game of the day then is Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is a title with a clear preference for AMD hardware, with the RX 6800 XT faster than even the RTX 3090 at 1440p. We can however see a very small difference between the RTX 3080 Ti and the 3090, with the Ti card coming in around 3% slower. Up at 4K though, the Nvidia GPUs do fare better against AMD, though the RX 6900 XT is still the fastest GPU in this title. Here, the RTX 3080 Ti averaged 59.5 FPS, putting it fractionally behind the RTX 3090, though I don't think you'd notice the difference in the real world. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077, where the RTX 3080 Ti averaged 84 FPS at 1440p. That's fractionally ahead of the RX 6900 XT and only 2% behind the RTX 3090, so it's certainly a case of fine margins. Up at 4K, the difference between the 3080 Ti and the 3090 does widen, but only to 3%, and that's actually the biggest difference between these two cards we will see today. The 3080 Ti is now also 9% faster than the RX 6900 XT. Days Gone is the next game to look at, and this formerly PlayStation exclusive title also prefers Nvidia hardware thanks to its use of DX11 and Unreal Engine 4. At 1440p for instance, the RTX 3080 Ti smokes the 6900 XT by 16%, while it's also 8% faster than the RTX 3080. Up at 4K as well, the picture gets worse for AMD, as the 3080 Ti is now a huge 22% faster than the 6900 XT thanks to its average frame rate of 83.6 FPS. Once more, that's only just behind the RTX 3090 with a 2% differential. Moving on though to IO Interactive's Hitman 3. While not officially sponsored by AMD, Teams Red hardware does very well in this title. The RTX 3080 Ti for instance is 6% slower than the RX 6900 XT and only just about faster than the 6800 XT when testing at 1440p. We can still see a minuscule difference between the 3080 Ti and the 3090 however, with just 2% in it. As for 4K, Ampere is stronger at this resolution, but the RTX 3080 Ti is still 4% slower than the 6900 XT. The key takeaway though is that it's also just 2% slower than the RTX 3090, which is barely a 2 FPS difference. Horizon Zero Dawn is next, and this is another formerly PlayStation exclusive title that we are looking at. At 1440p, the RTX 3080 Ti is 4% slower than the 6900 XT, while it offers an extra 9% over the RTX 3080. The all-important comparison against the 3090 though sees a difference of just 3%. The same goes for 4K resolution as well, where once again the 3080 Ti is just 3% slower than the RTX 3090. It is also 5% faster at this resolution when compared to the 6900 XT, and that also gives it a 10% boost over the 3080. Resident Evil Village is another new addition to our test suite, and its preference for AMD GPUs is clear. At 1440p, the 3080 Ti is a touch slower than the RX 6800 XT, while it's also 9% behind the 6900 XT. Increasing the resolution though to 4K sees the 3080 Ti close the gap on the 6900 XT to just 2%. Again, the key point to pick out is the 3080 Ti coming in just behind the RTX 3090, with a 2% margin of difference between those two GPUs at both 1440p and 4K. Finally, we're going to close out our game testing with Watch Dogs Legion. Interestingly enough, the RX 6900 XT is top dog at 1440p here, excuse the pun, despite this being an Nvidia sponsored title. The RTX 3080 Ti is coming in 5% slower than that AMD GPU, and it's only 3% behind the RTX 3090. At 4K, the RTX 3080 Ti does overtake the 6900 XT, leading it by a 5% margin, though that's only a difference of 3 FPS. We're also still looking at a 3% difference between the RTX 3080 Ti and the 3090, with just a couple of frames separating those two GPUs. So that is a total of 7 games we have shown in this video, as I think by now you really do get the picture. We did test 12 games in total though, so if you want to see every single one of our benchmarks at 1080p, 1440p or 4K, do head over to the written review on kitguru.net. Averaged across the 12 games we have tested though, it is clear to see that the RTX 3080 Ti is essentially as fast as the RTX 3090, minus a couple of percentage points. The difference really is quite trivial, with a 2% margin between those two GPUs at 1440p and 4K. The differences versus the RX 6900 XT will be more variable depending on the games tested, but our sample sees the RTX 3080 Ti come in 4% faster on average at 4K, while it's also 10% faster on average compared to the 3080. Using this data, we can also look at cost per frame. Now, we do this using UK MSRPs at launch, which I know right now is completely meaningless, as the real world pricing of GPUs is significantly higher. However, it does give us an idea of how the manufacturer wants to position their product if supply was normal, so we will include this for those interested, but as always, take it with an absolutely massive grain of salt. Starting with the 1440p data then, the RTX 3080 Ti has a cost per frame of £8.12, so it is about 23% cheaper per frame when compared to the RTX 3090. Up against the RTX 3080 however, with its MSRP of £650, the 3080 is itself 30% cheaper per frame when compared to the 3080 Ti. It's a similar story at 4K as well. Yes, the value proposition is improved from the RTX 3090, but the RTX 3090 was never good value to begin with. The cost per frame increase of 47% compared to the RTX 3080 is what causes problems, especially when considering the 3080 Ti is only 10% faster on average. Moving on though, we do also have ray tracing performance to look at. That said, RT performance in Cyberpunk 2077 doesn't show us anything we wouldn't expect based on the rasterization numbers. With 2 fewer RT cores compared to the RTX 3090, we can see the RTX 3080 Ti is sitting just behind that flagship GPU when ray tracing is set to Ultra. DLSS is also on hand for this GPU to give a healthy performance boost when using the quality mode, with a 67% increase to the average frame rate at 1440p. Now that also goes for Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, where the RTX 3080 Ti is just a few frames behind the RTX 3090 with ray tracing set to Ultra. DLSS quality mode is also present to provide a 42% boost to frame rates at 1440p. We do also test Resident Evil Village with ray tracing enabled, but it is more of the same. The 3080 Ti is snapping at the heels of the 3090 the whole way, delivering just 2 FPS less when tested at 4K, which also puts it 18% ahead of the 6900 XT. Leaving gaming performance behind now, here we're going to move on to talk about power draw before taking a closer look at the 3 AIB cards we have also tested. In terms of power draw testing, we have actually recently revamped our whole test methodology for this, so if you do want to find out more, please do check out the recent video I made on this overhaul. What we'll show first though is power draw for each of our 12 games, testing at 1440p. The RTX 3080 Ti has a power limit of 350 watts, but typically it came in a little shy of that, with Assassin's Creed Valhalla being a clear outlier with less than 300 watts power consumption. On average at 1440p though, we saw power draw hit 336.8 watts, so that's about 15 watts less than the RTX 3090. As for 4K testing, here things do equalise a bit, and power draw is much more consistent across the 12 games we tested. On average at this resolution, the 3080 Ti drew 342.2 watts, so that's still about 10 watts less than the RTX 3090, even at 4K. I guess this does make sense though, due to the 3080 Ti having half the memory modules, but it's certainly not a big difference. That also carries over to performance per watt, which we're showing based on 4K data. It's no surprise to see that this is level with the RTX 3090, as we know the 3080 Ti is fractionally slower while drawing fractionally less power. It is, however, a step behind the RX 6900 XT and the RX 6800, with the latter GPU proving the most efficient at every resolution we have tested. Moving on though, let's meet the 3 AIB cards properly. We'll start with the Gigabyte Gaming OC, which is a triple fan card with 2 90mm fans and one 80mm fan. It uses a grey and black plastic shroud, while we also get a silver metal backplate with a large cutout for airflow towards the end. Power comes from 2 8-pin inputs, while dual BIOS is also present, with the OC BIOS getting a higher 370 watt power limit. Next is the Palit Game Rock OC, and this has the same bombastic design as the RTX 3090 model we have already reviewed. This means RGB is at the forefront for this card, with an immense crystal-like plastic acting as a giant diffuser for all the LEDs. It's also packing 3 90mm fans, but it needs 3 8-pin power inputs, largely because the OC BIOS has a pretty hefty 400 watt power limit. Last but certainly not least is the Inno3D iChill X4. Now this is certainly not a subtle looking card, with a bold and very aggressive shroud design that uses a combination of metal and plastic. While its 3 primary fans measure 90mm in diameter, it even has a 4th 45mm fan on the front of the card, designed to offer increased VRM cooling. The black backplate is also very aggressive looking, while we find 2 8-pin power inputs. Interestingly though, the iChill X4 is the only AIB model to not feature dual BIOS. We'll start our comparison between these GPUs then with a look at the card's gaming performance. Here we're only showing a handful of games, as there isn't a whole lot to be gained from a factory overclocked AIB card. In some instances, the factory OC is enough to push the 3080 Ti beyond the RTX 3090, as seen in Gears 5. In other examples, however, such as Total War Saga Troy, the additional clock speed the partners have added really is inconsequential. The bottom line is that a 3080 Ti performs like a 3080 Ti, and factory overclock or not, they're all very much in the same ballpark. The reason for this, and why we saw such similar gaming performance between all 4 RTX 3080 Ti cards we tested, is that even the factory overclock models don't run that much faster in terms of their clock speed. The Gigabyte gaming OC managed the highest frequency, averaging 1862 MHz when using the card's OC BIOS, but that is still less than a 50 MHz boost compared to the reference clocked Founders Edition. Temperature testing though is an area where we can see much more of a difference between the four cards tested. First of all, Nvidia's decision to use the RTX 3080 cooler for the 3080 Ti is not problematic at all, as the GPU hotspot did not exceed 80 degrees in our testing. The Palit and Gigabyte cards are able to better that though, with the gaming OC's OC BIOS delivering the coolest results, with a hotspot temperature of 74 degrees. On the other hand, the Inno3D iChill X4 is more problematic, with a hotspot hitting 96 degrees, while the GPU temperature hits 77 degrees. That is a pretty large delta between the two measurements, possibly indicative of less than ideal mounting pressure, but Inno3D did ask us before we began testing to not disassemble the card, so we can't verify this theory. We also see a fair amount of variation between the cards when looking at noise levels. Top of the pile is the iChill X4, which produced 46 decibels of noise, with its fan spinning up to 59%, or 2150 RPM, so that is pretty fast. The Palit and Gigabyte models are next when using their OC or performance BIOS, as these models do run at a higher power limit than their silent modes. As for the Founders Edition, that hit 40 decibels, which is a bit louder than the likes of the RTX 3070 Founders Edition, but it's certainly not terrible. Thankfully, we did get lower results from the gaming OC's silent BIOS, which produced 37 decibels. It's still not what I would call exactly silent, but it is the lowest noise reading of all the 3080 Ti's we have tested today. Let's take noise out of the equation though with our noise-normalised thermals, and this is where we get the most apples to apples comparison. Do bear in mind though that different power limits can still affect things though, and that's proven by the gaming OC's OC BIOS, which ran 1 degree hotter than the card's silent BIOS, despite both using the same fan speed. This is because the OC BIOS has a 370 watt power limit compared to 350 watts for the silent BIOS. The same can also be said for the GameRock OC, with its OC BIOS targeting 400 watts compared to 370 watts for the silent BIOS. Now, both of those cards produced what I would call very solid results, but at the very top, the iChill X4 is suffering, again with a large delta between the GPU and the hotspot temperatures. The last area I want to look at now is manual overclocking. Here, honestly, all four of our 3080 Ti's overclock to roughly the same levels, getting around an 80 to 100 MHz boost for the GPU, with memory overclocks typically in the 1200 to 1300 MHz range. The exception to that was, yes, the iChill X4, which only managed an extra 40 MHz on the GPU compared to stock behaviour, though do bear in mind this can vary from sample to sample. In a nutshell though, this extra frequency brought performance increases anywhere from 4 to 9% depending on the game and the exact GPU. It's basically the same sort of overclocking headroom as we've seen from Ampere as a whole, so it is certainly possible to extract a bit more from the GPU, but don't expect massive increases. With all that said, it is time to wrap up this review. Honestly, summarising the performance of the RTX 3080 Ti is very easy, as it's basically a 3090 but with 2 fewer SMs and half the memory. That means, in terms of gaming performance, we never saw it come in more than 3% slower when compared to the 3090, and when testing at 4K, it is still faster on average when compared to the 6900 XT. So that may seem all fine and dandy, especially when you consider the fact that the RTX 3080 Ti is meant to be £350 cheaper than the RTX 3090. Happy days, right? Well, not quite. The thing I don't like about the RTX 3080 Ti is it's another GA102 GPU, but this time it's priced at over £1,000, meaning all the dies that's going for the 3080 Ti won't be going for the 3080, which should be £650. If we were in a normal market with plenty of stock, then this wouldn't be a problem, as it would just mean more choice for the consumer. The thing is, it's almost impossible to buy an RTX 3080 right now, and this certainly won't make things easier. Even if we do take MSRPs at face value, I'm also just a bit confused who this GPU is for. It seems to be positioned for those who want something faster than an RTX 3080, who don't want to spend £1,399 on a 3090, but are still happy to drop over £1,000 on the 3080 Ti for just 10% more performance than the 3080. The way I see it is, if you're already spending over £1,000 on a GPU, then straight up you do not care about value, at which point you may as well just get the best of the best and buy the 3090. If you do care about value though, as we have shown, the 3080 Ti is just a very poor option when compared to the RTX 3080 at £650. The unfortunate thing is, as we know, those GPUs are simply not available at that price. Before wrapping up, I do also want to give a final word on the 3 AIB cards we have tested. I did run into some issues with the Inno3D iChill X4, particularly with the GPU hotspot temperature running pretty high, and it was also fairly loud, so unfortunately I can't give that card a solid recommendation. The Gigabyte Gaming OC, however, was much better, with very solid noise-normalised thermals and impressive memory temperatures as well. So if you are looking for a 3080 Ti, that one does get the thumbs up from me. So that really is going to do it for this video. If you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are you considering the 3080 Ti, or do you think it just shouldn't exist? Please do let me know. You can also subscribe if you haven't already and ding that notification bell, and why not come chat with us over on our Discord server, which is linked in the description. While you're there, you can check out some of our merch, including this t-shirt I am wearing here, and why not consider backing us on Patreon, where you can see some of our content early and get access to exclusive giveaways. Until then though guys, I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.